Emerging risks related to food safety. Emerging risks can be defined as resulting from newly identified hazards to which a significant exposure may occur, or from unexpected new or increased significant exposure or susceptibility to a known hazard. The assessment of emerging risk requires early detection or prediction through indicators, trends, allowing preventive measures. Now, it's interesting that the European Rapid Alert System for Food and Feed lists food safety hazards, either illegal substances or unacceptable concentration of chemicals or microorganisms, on its database on a weekly basis and also with annual reports. And all this can be consulted on the web. Member states identify hazards, and then they must report them to this system. And here I have collected some of the chemical hazards for the period 2003-2007. And you can find antibiotics, mainly in seafoods, allergens in seafoods also, illegal coloring substances, also quite a few food contact substances, including inks from packaging, which migrated into drinks, but also many organic substances which migrated from plastic packaging into the food. Heavy metals from various utensils, of course heavy metals from contamination, also general contamination in seafood, illegal pesticides, or too high levels of legal pesticides. And then the same reports list problems with microorganisms, hygiene-related packaging issues, mycotoxin, etc. I have also done a search on the database Science Direct using the word food and risk for the titles of articles for the 2 last years, and I found 115 relevant articles, and I've listed those which appear quite often, like risk assessment and characterization in food allergy, microbial risks, risky food behavior linked to obesity, for example, population at risk, consumers' perception of food risk, risk of genetically modified food, and then other topics less quoted. Now, in the EFSA draft strategic plan, very recent, are listed the determinants for emerging food safety issues. Why do they maybe will come and be more numerous? Increasing globalization of the food industry. Of course, a food that travels from continent to continent may cause global problems, for example. Intensive agricultural methods and use of agri-chemicals will increase pollution with fertilizers, pesticides. Climate changes will change food and crop production, but also diseases, plant and animal diseases. Difficulties in dealing with the fast pace of innovation in food production, genetically modified foods, animal cloning, nanotechnologies, etc. And also I've added demographic, socioeconomic changes with changes in population, in vulnerable population groups like aging people, obese people, poor, overpopulation, etc. Now, of course, these emerging risks are largely due to human activities, and they have a high degree of complexity and uncertainty. And they are related to the type of technology, the type of component in the food, the type of food attribute, and of course different types of risks. New preservation technologies that were mentioned before, they can have both beneficial and detrimental effects. Now, very generally, the main potential detrimental effects are non-homogeneity of treatment, over or under processing, incomplete inactivation of microorganisms, viruses, parasites, with microbial recovery adaptation of stress-resistant microbial strains, partial inactivation of natural anti-nutrients, allergens, toxic and nutrient losses or reduction of their bioavailability, formation of toxic molecules, migration of chemicals from package into food. Now, if we look more specifically at specific technologies, high pressure, I think it's mainly microbial recovery, some chemical reaction, pulse electric field, non-homogeneity, electrochemical reaction, metal transfer from electrodes. I found a paper on the formation of mutagens, light pulse, non-homogeneity, photooxidative reaction, ultrasound, low efficiency for microbial inactivation, but safe cleaning, ohmic heating, overheating, underheating. Now, microwaves has been much more studied than the preceding ones, and there are problems with cold spots. There's also power reduction in a domestic oven after a certain time of utilization. Ionizing reactions have been very much studied. There are free radicals and oxidative reaction, but altogether they are not so dangerous. They have been encouraged even by the World Health Organization, provided some precautions are taken. Modified atmosphere, low efficiency, moderate toxicity. You know that we have a war with the United States. There is a European ban on US chicken because they wash chicken with some chlorinated compounds, which we don't accept here, although EFSA has said they are not dangerous. Emerging risk, some technological changes have totally unexpected effects. For example, in the mad cow crisis, the omission of some technical steps like fat rendering, hot solvent extraction, high temperature desolventization in the production process of meat and bone flours from ovine and bovine carcasses and offals, the simplified process failed to inactivate pathogenic prions and thus enhance the spread of bovine spongiform encephalopathy. I'm not saying it's the sole cause, but it's probably it was an enhancing cause. Now, examples of risk which have led to food crisis include criminal frauds. You know, the addition of mineral oils containing PCB and dioxins recently to feed given to Irish pigs, but previous cases last year, Ukrainian sunflower oil with mineral oil exported to Europe, Belgian chicken fed oils from electric transformers, an older problem of contaminated olive oil in Spain. And then the addition of melamine to gluten feed and to milk by Chinese firms or cooperatives to increase the nitrogen content. The deliberate addition of toxic substances to food and drinks can also come under bioterrorism, and the United States have taken many measures against this. Now, melamine toxicity risk can be found in EFSA scientific reports. They are all available on the web for free. In the melamine gluten cases, thousands of cats and dogs were hurt or killed in the USA without much impact on the Chinese food operators. But then in the melamine milk case, the lack of transparency from Chinese authority and the late recall of products caused kidney problems to 300,000 babies and infants. 50,000 were hospitalized, and there were at least 6 deaths. And I would like to say that the illegal production of foods and the use of non-authorized food or feed additives are very frequent in China, with opaque supply networks, corruption, official silence. The Chinese government has taken some steps, but I don't think that it's enough. 2 years ago, there were about 2,000 producers and 1,000 retailers who exported food ingredients and additives worth 4 billion euros. And that included vitamins and amino acids. And food and pharmaceutical companies worldwide, including in Europe, use these ingredients and additives without appropriate traceability or quality control. Foodborne infection, I will go very fast because it has already been mentioned. Of course, there are very big numbers. This is an estimation. but these estimations are 10 or 100 times more numerous than the well-documented cases. What is sure is that new pathogen, new variants of pathogen, and new unexpected food vehicles continue to be identified. And this reflects the importance of local ecosystem, both in the fields, in the animals, but also in food production facilities. And I want to emphasize the very great importance of public health surveillance network, including transnational networks and also DNA pathogen subtyping networks. These surveys now permit to detect not only the classical brotes, classical local outbreaks, but also dispersed infection outbreaks which were previously viewed as sporadic cases. And this is very important because each dispersed outbreak may permit to identify unsuspected problems such as systematic defect in a food production process before distribution. Now, listeria risk, I don't want to go too far, but the problem is that minimal processing in food is being increasingly used, including for ready-to-eat food. It is very useful for quality and shelf life, but it brings only partial microbial inactivation. What are the risks of adaptation of microorganisms to cold temperature, weak acid, preservative, low pH, osmotic stress? In fact, emerging pathogens adapted to cold temperature have already caused problems. And the widespread occurrence of bacteria resistance to multiple drugs indicates the magnitude of the risks. Animals like cows and pigs already harbor antibiotic-resistant microorganisms. Now, if we look at some technologies, you know that this is the use of substance on a very small scale, and the small size increase diffusivity, and the higher surface increase reactivity. What are they used for? Well, they may change many properties of food. Potential use are stable emulsion without emulsifiers, molecular traps with targeted delivery, enhanced availability of nutrients, etc. I am not going to go into detail. Also, the current usage of nanotechnology in food is not so well known, and there are broad uncertainties over the safe use of these materials for food and their health implication of exposure. Existing risk assessment methods can be applied on a case-by-case basis, but it is not possible to extrapolate non-nanochemicals to their nanochemical equivalent, because nanosize may change properties. So there are limitations and uncertainties on detecting them, measuring them, on knowing their absorption, distribution, metabolism, expression, toxicology. They may be retained in the body, accumulate, they can pass through membranes, including the brain barriers. So there is a need for more research, and of course for nanotechnology applicants for authorization, many data are needed. Animal cloning for food production, there are also scientific opinions from EFSA, and they say that based on current knowledge, which perhaps is not enough yet, there is no expectation that clones or their progeny would introduce any new food safety risks. Milk and meat obtained from healthy cattle and pig clones and their offsprings are within the normal range with respect to the composition and nutritional value of similar products obtained from conventionally bred animals. Well, the interest of cloning, I will not go into details, but it can give better animals. It can also give better meat, better milk with some properties. Cloned animals themselves would not be eaten. They are too expensive, 30,000 euros for one cloned animal. But they may be used to generate naturally better offspring, naturally meaning by sexual reproduction. Now, technology basis, the somatic cell nuclear transfer, I'm not going to go into details. The concern, of course, consumer groups, the groups on ethics, and even the food industry have expressed their concerns and requested more research on food safety and on animal health and welfare. And it is true that cloned animals often experience a higher rate of disease, or rather they experience reproductive problems. But once there is a clone, it seems that later the offspring of the clones have no problems. Acrylamide, you know that acrylamide may be formed in foods subjected to high temperature process, frying, baking, roasting, microwaving at high temperature. Precise mechanism of formation are unsure, but involve Maillard reaction between asparagine and reducing sugars or carbonyls. It's a known carcinogen in experimental animals. Thus, the European International food industry has published a toolbox to show how one can reduce the content of acrylamide in foods. It's not exactly known if acrylamide increases cancer risk in humans, but of course people have been exposed to acrylamides for a long time, since the technologies are common practice. And this example shows that even long-used processes can suddenly reveal unexpected risks. Active and intelligent food packaging, there are some safety concerns too. I'm not going to explain what are these, because it has already been said. Classic packaging should not interact with the food, while active and intelligent should interact in the food in different manners. And they are very promising, but they are not yet widely used. The main safety issue as for classic packaging is migration of chemicals into the food. So it should be carefully assessed, and also break down products, and only authorized substance should be used. Their efficiency should be demonstrated, especially when they are intended to prevent microbial growth or to reveal the presence of pathogen or toxic substances. Their acceptance appears to be limited. For example, consumers may perceive systems for the extension of shelf life as detrimental to food freshness. Retailers also are scared that consumers will take the recently produced products rather than the old ones, the older ones, etc. So there are some limitations for acceptance. Now, radio frequency identification tags, they don't interact with the food, but they can be printed on food package. They may change food sales and marketing, allow cell phones to indicate in the shop, to indicate food composition, to indicate nutritional adequacy. They may permit a refrigerator to signal expiry dates and send automatic reorders. They may permit a robot oven to cook automatically. There is a risk, though, of neuromarketing and intrusion into private life with these new tags, new type of labeling. Now, citizen perception of risk in food technologies. You know very well that ionizing irradiation, hormonal treatment of animals, or antibiotic treatment, which are banned in the EU in most cases, various food additives, genetically modified plant and food, genetically modified animals, they tend to elicit consumer rejection. The consumer right to informed choice is now well established in the EU, much less in the United States. Mandatory labeling for irradiated food and genetically modified food has discouraged manufacturers and retailers to place such food on the market, in spite of many potential advantages. And I will not go into the details of advantages. Now, factors influencing consumer acceptance of innovative food technologies and products. Perceived benefits corresponding to consumers' need, more healthy, more nutritive, lower price, are major determinants. Many consumers perceive new food technologies are more risky than traditional ones. Tampering with nature, for example, genetic engineering, seems to be a predictor of risk, perceived risk. while nature and naturalness are positive values. Chemical transformations, additive, artificial ingredients, and gene modification are perceived as most distant from nature, while physical transformation and genetic selection, classical genetic selection, appears as less deviant. Consumers often rely on general attitude for judgment, which means that social amplification may increase risk perception for processes which are considered as safe by experts. Since most consumers have a limited knowledge of benefit and risk, trust is a crucial determinant of acceptance, for example, for functional foods. Consumers trust more easily operators with shared values, such as consumers' association. And I will show later that trust is generally given to independent scientists more than to national food authorities or to the food industry. Thus, the technology used to create a food may dissuade consumers from buying, especially if they assume more profit to producers and to them, and if the technology deviates from naturalness. To change prior suspicious cultural or social attitudes of consumers, it is necessary to build trust and demonstrate tangible benefits and association with natural processes, which is not always easy and perhaps not always desirable, for experts at least. This shows that in case of serious food risks, Europeans would most trust consumer groups, the doctor or physician, and scientists. And to finish, just a few words about legislation. And I have selected the regulation of novel food, which you know that it subjects each novel food to a severe pre-market safety assessment and authorization procedure. It also edicts specific labeling rules to inform the consumer of anything new. The categories: a food not used significantly before a given date, new or modified molecular structure or ingredient isolated from animals, etc., food or ingredients subjected to a new process or issued from a new production or breeding process. And that includes also some functional foods, which are also subject to the health claim regulation. Some genetically modified foods, food additives, etc., are excluded from this regulation because they come under other regulations. And also there is a possibility of simplified notification for a novel food substantially equivalent to an existing food, but the novel food regulation exerts strong constraints, very costly, long delays, which are detrimental both from exotic food from third countries, but also very detrimental to new innovative foods and to new technologies. There is a revised proposal of beginning of last year. It's being discussed. You know that it always takes a long time. And it has additional main objectives: promote a more favorable legislative environment for innovation and competition. Also consider the needs of traditional foods from third countries, facilitate implementation with a single EU harmonized, centralized and shorter procedure for assessment and authorization, and give a wider choice of safe novel food to the consumers. But we don't know exactly how it's going to come out, this new proposal. And my conclusion is, and I think I've taken too much time, so I'm going just to show it and not to say it. Thank you for your attention.